What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are breaking down 5 more must-start players moving into Week 2 of the 2023 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, all we do here is free fantasy football content all year round, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. So if you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way. But other than that, guys, please get in the comment section down below any fantasy football questions you guys have. Starts, sits, trades, roster reviews, waiver wire, whatever you guys need, let me know down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. But let's not waste any more time. Let's hop into today's video. All right, first overall, I'm rolling with Keenan Allen against the Tennessee Titans. The Titans, the second worst team in the league in Week 1 against passing offenses, gave up the second most points to opposing wide receivers. So we look at this matchup. Yeah, like Mike Williams. I think Gerald Everett could have a good day. Maybe Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston get a little bit more involved. Austin Eckler, as long as he's good to go, should have a good day. I mean, ultimately, this is a good matchup for both the Titans wide receivers because the Chargers looked awful against the pass last week in Week 1 as well. So if you own D-Hop and he does play, he's questionable at the time of recording this, he's a good start. Really, I like just about everyone in this matchup overall. Both units bad against opposing wide receivers and against the pass, at least in Week 1. Still a small sample size. But Keenan Allen is the play that I like. I mean, Mike Williams maybe a little bit more upside, but he got a little dinged up in Week 1. Tale as old as time. Keenan Allen in Week 1, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 76 receiving yards, no touchdowns, but 14.2 fantasy points in full PPR. So we look at Keenan Allen last year. Once he got healthy, weeks 11 through 18, he had 11 or more fantasy points in full PPR scoring every single game. When the Chargers played Tennessee in Week 15, 16.6 fantasy points. And some of you guys might be looking at this like, hey, I know I'm starting Keenan Allen. This is a no-brainer. But guys, we see all kinds of rosters, okay? We get all kinds of questions. And throughout the week, I have got enough questions about Keenan Allen compared to other wide receivers on starting rosters that all I'm saying is Keenan Allen against his Tennessee Titans. Very poor defense is an absolute smash play moving into Week 2. Second overall, I'm going with James Cook. I think he's a really solid RB2 moving into the coming week. The Raiders, middle of the pack against the run. A little bit surprising. That Broncos-Raiders matchup, a little bit weird in Week 1. Raiders defense did look better than I thought, but maybe that had more to do with the Broncos just not being a great offense. I'm not sure. Nonetheless, the Bills coming off of a tough loss in an away game against the Jets in Week 1. They're at home here in Week 2, hosting the Raiders. Listen, James Cook's usage in Week 1, very promising in full PPR formats. 12 rushing attempts, 46 yards on the ground. Nothing too crazy there, but 6 targets and 4 receptions in Week 1 against a good Jets unit. This Las Vegas Raiders unit, not quite the same. Like I said, surprised us a little bit in Week 1, but I'm not very confident that they're going to be able to hold up the Bills in their first home game here in the 2023 season. So James Cook, I think he's a really good RB2 in full PPR formats to go ahead and fire up. We might even see a better usage in the passing game. Hopefully we do. And ultimately, I think the Bills as a whole just play better offensively in Week 2. Josh Allen did not look so hot in Week 1. I think they're going to bounce back against the Raiders in large fashion. Cook should have a much better game, and he still got you double digits at 10 points in Week 1. So I like Cook quite a bit moving into Week 2. All right, next up on the list, we've got JAHAN Dotson. He made the video for the wide receiver position last week and kind of disappointed, but I want to kind of point out a couple things here for JAHAN Dotson moving into Week 2 because I think he's a really strong flex play, okay? Still had the most targets overall for Washington's wide receivers in Week 1 at 7 targets. Terry McLaurin, 4 targets. Curtis Samuel, 5 targets. And then Logan Thomas at the tight end position had 1 more target with 8 total targets. But when we're purely looking at wide receivers, Dotson still got the most volume. It looks like Sam Howell still has that chemistry we were hoping for with Dotson in the offseason. 5 receptions, 40 receiving yards, 8 yards per catch, just 9 fantasy points, ultimately against a poor Cardinals defense that was disappointing. But let's look back to the Denver game in Week 1, okay? We might look at this matchup and say, I don't know, Pat Surtain, I don't really want to fire up Dotson, but Pat Surtain should be locked onto Terry McLaurin throughout this game. In week 1, he was all over Devontae Adams. That was his role. And Jacoby Myers, 2 touchdowns, absolutely balled out at the wide receiver 2 spot for the Raiders. Dotson is the wide receiver 2 for Washington. I expect a big game. Maybe not 2 touchdowns, but he should be able to get loose in this matchup. He's going to see better volume than the other wide receivers on this team. And if we're looking at week 1 and what Denver did against wide receiver 2s in week 1, this should be a smash play. Give him a little bit of trust. I know he's disappointed in week 1. I think he bounces back in strong fashion in week 2. All right, 4th overall, I'm going with Jamaal Williams. Not really a great week 1, not a good game script. This turned into a game where both units were throwing the ball more than running. 7.2 fantasy points, 18 rushing attempts, 45 yards on the ground, 2 receptions for 7 receiving yards, and a fumble for Jamaal Williams. So not a good week 1 overall. This is an away game for the Saints, but ultimately the Panthers gave up the 2nd most points to the running back position in week 1. I mean, come on. Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier ran all over that unit through the whole game. Jamaal Williams should have some really nice opportunities in this game. And, while he disappointed us in week 1 in fantasy, 18 rushing attempts, he is the clear RB1 on this team. Kendre Miller's still been limited throughout practice throughout the week. We know Alvin Kamara is not going to play in week 2. So this is a good matchup for Jamaal Williams. The usage was really good in week 1. And ultimately, if you're kind of struggling at the RB2 spot, I think he is a really good option moving in to week 2. Last but not least, trying to think a little bit outside of the box for today's list. So I'm going to roll with Elijah Moore going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who allowed the 3rd most points to opposing wide receivers in week 1. I mean, yeah, a little bit of a different offensive unit when we're looking at, Kyle Shanahan's San Francisco 49ers compared to the Cleveland Browns. But let's face it, the Browns looked good enough in week 1 in a surprise victory against the Cincinnati Bengals. When we look at this Browns receiving core, David Njoku, 3 targets. DPJ, 2 targets. Amari Cooper, 7 targets. Tied for Elijah Moore's 7 targets. So tied for the most overall targets on this team. Just 3 receptions, that doesn't feel so good, but 43 receiving yards. He did make the most of those receptions. Plus, this was a rain game. It was just kind of a gross game overall. But like I said, Elijah Moore tied for the most targets in terms of the wide receiver position on this unit. It looks like him and Watson have a nice chemistry, and looks like he's moving into that wide receiver 2 spot over DPJ. So I think Elijah Moore, full PPR. If you're struggling at the flex, he's a roster option for you. I do think you go ahead and fire him up. Monday Night Football, I expect the Steelers to play a little bit better. This is a home game for the Steelers, but I do think this secondary is going to be poor throughout the year. I think this is another matchup where the Browns have something to prove against a divisional opponent. I like Elijah Moore as a strong flex option in full PPR moving in to week 2. That'll do it for today's video. If you guys did find the content enjoyable or helpful, and if you want more fantasy football content in your algorithm, be sure to subscribe on the way out. This is all we do here all year round. If you guys have any fantasy football questions, whatever you guys need, start sits, waivers, trades, injury updates, roster reviews, roster confidence, excitement for week 2, whatever it may be, let me know in the comments down below. I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And be sure to look out for our next fantasy Q&A live stream where I will answer any of your guys' fantasy football questions live right away. But with that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.